to the German Climate Pavilion at COP29 in Baku. Germany. Climate solutions, fast and fair.
Welcome everybody to this afternoon session. Can I get a smile and a big round of applause? I know it's been a long day, I know we are in the midst of negotiation and our calendars are packed, but thank you so much for joining us here at the Nature Day of COP29 here in Baku. And of course to you, ladies and gentlemen, joining us from wherever time zone you are joining us, welcome in the German Climate Pavilion. It's great to have you and to have you for this afternoon session here on site. Well, we're going to dive into the question how nature can be an ally for climate action, for both adaptation and for mitigation. And throughout our event, water will play a pivotal role as a central element that is essential for solutions that we are diving into. What makes it successful? And of course, water plays in different contexts a pivotal role. Water is, in some parts of the world, really a messenger of catastrophes, right? When we look into floodings. But when we look on other sides of water and of water context and the nexus of water, it can be a driver for strong solutions when we link these solutions coming out of the water nexus. So the question really that is keeping us busy now in the next hour, how do we leverage the potential of the water nexus for solutions? How do we drive them forward? How do we better understand this potential? And how do we underline this potential with policy frameworks, right? 60 minutes, I doubt it won't be enough to find all the answers, but in the end we will come out with some inspiration and I hope some to-do lists for the negotiations, but also for the time ahead. For the official opening and of course for her priorities, I welcome now on stage the Federal Minister for the Environment, for Nature Conservation, Nuclear Safety and Consumer Protection. Please also give her a round of applause, Steffi Lemke.
Guests, Katie Gallus, experts on our panel, and Minister Eder, welcome here in the German Pavilion this afternoon. I'm delighted that you are joining us here, whether in person or virtually, on today's Nature Day. In fact, every day of COP should be Nature Day. Nature is a key ally in the fight against the climate crisis, and we are far from making full use of nature's potential. The human-made climate crisis is throwing nature off balance. This is especially true when it comes to water. All too often we hear reports about devastating floods or droughts in all regions of the world. People are losing their lives, livelihoods are being destroyed. And the steadily rising amounts of losses are often not attributed to the climate crisis, but they have to be borne by society. The new reality is increasingly either far too much water or not enough. We have to face up to this in order to minimize losses as much as possible. Technological solutions, dikes and insurance policies are important instruments for adaptation to climate change. They can protect people. But we also need measures that tackle the roots of the problem. Nature provides us such solutions. There is still huge potential to harness for climate change mitigation and adaptation. This is what I'm calling for on today's Nature Day. To be precise, give rivers more room and connect them with their floodplains. This will enable water to spread over large areas where it can then seep into the soil and be stored for dry periods, instead of flooding cities and built-up areas. Let semi-natural mixed forests grow. They are major water reservoirs and they also cool in hot weather and store CO2. Repeat peatlands Wet peatlands store carbon and provide a stable water supply in their surrounding areas. They can soak up water like a sponge and store it for long periods. We can use nature's strengths for us humans and for climate change mitigation and adaptation. This should be the common thread in our policies. In Germany, our key program is the Action Plan on Nature-Based Solutions for Climate and Biodiversity. With our action plan, we are promoting healthy forests and peatlands, nature-based coastal protection, and more nature in urban areas. This enables ecosystems to contribute to climate change mitigation and protect us from the impacts of the climate crisis. The new EU Nature Restoration Regulation is also a key tool for strengthening nature. When implementing the regulation, we will harness the synergies with nature-based solutions and climate adaptation. In July, Germany's first ever Climate Adaptation Act came into force. It requires the federal government, federal states and municipalities to draw up plans for adaptation to the impacts of global heating. We also have developed a new precautionary adaptation strategy, and this will enable measurable targets to be set for climate adaptation in Germany. The goal of our new national water strategy is to ensure that sufficient clean water is available for people and nature for the long term. And at international level too, Germany advocates greater use of nature-based solutions. To this end, we are setting up a funding window for nature-based solutions in cooperation with the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. This will be part of the high-impact partnership on climate action, and I'm delighted that the German Environment Ministry will contribute 8 million euros. By doing this, we are making nature-friendly investments attractive. And we are creating an incentive for development banks to align their activities with global climate and biodiversity targets. Germany is already the biggest donor to the Global Adaptation Fund. Here at COP29, we have pledged a further 60 million euros for 2024. With our international climate initiative, we give partner countries targeted and practical support to increase their resilience to the impacts of the climate crisis by using nature-based solutions. As part of this initiative, we are contributing to the EBA facility in the Caribbean and the Global EBA Fund. The two funds combined have already at launch more than 100 small-scale projects on ecosystem-based adaptation. For example, measures to protect intact and resilient coastal ecosystems. This improves protection for the population during extreme weather events like hurricanes. And with the INACT partnership, we are enabling in-depth exchange on nature-based solutions. As you can see, there are already promising and productive approaches to merging climate change mitigation and adaptation, nature restoration, and stabilizing the water balance. We have to become much more systematic in our approaches in future. I'm very optimistic that we will succeed. We hold regular exchanges with stakeholders at our UN partners, with NGOs and multilateral organizations. I look forward to hearing from the panel of experts who will shortly be discussing experiences and solutions for how to bring together climate change mitigation and nature conservation, water policy and climate adaptation. To achieve the goals we have set ourselves in international environmental agreements, it is important for national climate action plans, adaptation plans, and plans to protect biodiversity to be more closely linked. Thank you very much for your attention and have a good discussion here.
Thank you very much, Her Excellency Steffi Lemke. Have a successful rest of the day. Thank you very much. Now we're going to start with the panel of experts. May I ask you to join me here on stage directly, and I'll do the introduction round here on site. So we have Ingrid, Timboe, Dr. Maria del Pilar Cornejo de Grunauer joining us virtually, and Verónica Ruiz, but also Dr. Ulf Jaeckel. Join me here on stage, please. Yes, as previously mentioned, a lot of keywords again in the room with the questions on how we can scale both nature restoration and nature-based climate change adaptation, mitigation, to harness and to leverage the synergies. With me now here on the panel is Ingrid Timboe, the Deputy Executive Director of AGWE, the Alliance Global Water Adaptation. Thank you for making space in the calendar. I know that is really yes, very special to have you. And joining us virtually, I hope you can hear as well, Dr. Maria del Pilar Cornejo de Grunauer, the Director of the Pacific International Center for Disaster Risk Reduction at ESPOL Polytechnic University, with a scientific background in physical oceanography and also teaching aquaculture for over 34 years. Can you hear as well?
Yes, I hear you very well. Greetings to everybody. I'm
Wonderful.
very happy to be here sharing with you.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, and greetings from Baku. We also have on the panel on your right-hand side Verónica Ruiz, the Climate and Disaster Resilience Program Manager and the Climate Change and Energy Transition Team at IUCN. Veronica supports IUCN's global work on the climate-nature nexus, with the question really why and how they must be considered together, and really towards a coordinated and inclusive approach. What does this mean in practice, this inclusiveness when it comes to the approach? We're all curious to hear more about that in a second. Again, also to you, muchas gracias for being here. But last but not least is Dr. Ulf Jaeckel on stage with us as well. You're the Division Director of European and International Adaptation to Climate Change based in the Federal Ministry for the Environment, Nature Conservation, Nuclear Safety and Consumer Protection. What a round. Okay, so let's get started when we talk about the water nexus and the climate action that is needed. Ingrid, I'd like to start with you, looking back, of course, and now with the COP here in Baku happening, but also with a lot of COPs currently happening, also the biodiversity COP. In Cali, water is a topic quite prominently. Also important when it comes to the global goal on adaptation. Maybe you can give us the broader picture why water and the water nexus is so important when it comes to climate action and to leverage the potential of the water nexus, yes, in enabling the power of nature-based solutions of the water nexus.
Sure. Thank you so much, Katie, and thanks to the German Pavilion for having me this afternoon. It's really great to see everyone on almost the last day of COP. We've almost made it. So coming from the water perspective, why is water important for climate action? It has already been mentioned, actually, here, but when we think about, first and foremost, climate impacts, we feel them most directly through the water cycle. And we also know that climate change is impacting the water cycle itself. So we're seeing a lot more kind of erratic precipitation patterns, et cetera. I think the IPCC, the word that they used was supercharging the hydrologic cycle. And so what does that kind of mean for communities, for economies, for ecosystems and biodiversity as well? But the flip side of that, and the part that my organization, AGWA, really focuses on is not so much the climate impacts, although they're very important, obviously, because we are all impacted by them. But really, if the impacts are felt through water, then so too must the solutions be grounded in water. And so we really focus on where there are solutions, and in particular, looking at the nexus between water, between ecosystems, agriculture, and energy security. So that's kind of where we come to the discussion, and we have been engaged both on kind of the technical side and also the policy side, advocating for the increase of water in the COP, for example.
We'd like to hear more about, of course, about the challenges later on. Maria, when you were listening to Her Excellency Minister Steffi Lemke, but also coming from your perspective, the science perspective, what would you see the role of water that it plays for climate action and how it might change also in the coming decades? Because we do see what I mentioned earlier, water can be a messenger of catastrophes, but water can be also a messenger of solutions. So we are all interested in your scientific perspective on that.
Well, we know that freshwater availability is reducing and that we are also losing its good quality. There is kind of a failure of a hydrological cycle, and as you mentioned before, some sites have floods while others have droughts, like in my area. So what are the roles for water? I will say that the most important is climate regulation. It absorbs significant amounts of carbon dioxide and heat. That's what water does, and mitigates in a way the climate change effects. But also there are other ecosystem services that are very important for solving the climate crisis. For example, flood regulation or water purification after a flooding event. As I mentioned before too, agricultural food security, it's very important in terms of what water is doing for them. So for example, now that we have the large drought in the Amazonian basin, we are very worried about what impact it will have on food security in the whole region. It's not only one country, it's more than 4 countries that we are affected by this. Also, some adaptation strategies are very important, and we have to change the role of integrated water management. It cannot be static. It has to be very dynamic and resilient in the sense that it has to adapt to the changes. And I think this is one of the most important future roles of waters. Increased water scarcity is going to make the difference depending where you are. And we have to work a lot on policy and governance. But something that is almost forgotten is the role of communities in working and making the difference. Indigenous communities already know nature-based solutions to adapt to climate change. But somehow when we are in the policy side, and I have to mention I have been in both sides, academia and decision-making, we forget that all the changes are done on the territory. And I think this is very important for what we're going to do in relationship to water in the coming decades.
Mm-hmm. Gracias. Thank you, Maria, for your first introduction for this perspective. Veronica, before we dive into several keywords like the approach of and the question of being and designing the frameworks more in a systematic way, but also, of course, integrating more communities, I'd like to ask you in a general perspective, what do we still need to discuss more when it comes to global and international frameworks in including water nexus for climate action? You know, where do we see pain points that are still needed to get and to be tackled, not just here on COP29 or in the COP at Cali, but in a general matter, because these fights are not easy to fight.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you, Pilar, because also she pointed a couple of points very important. I have to say also thank you for being here today, for inviting me here. Being more personal, no? I just came back from Cali, 2 very intense weeks, a lot of discussion on climate and nature. Now we come here to keep talking about nature and climate. But still there is a lot to do, right? We are talking about, if we go to every event that we are having here, we are talking about breaking the silos, coming together, aligning conventions, but how do we do this in reality? This is a lot of work to do. Are we willing to do this work? And I really do think the resources are there. We have a lot of projects going on the ground, and then we have a lot of evidence base. So all this evidence, we really do believe in IUCN that these evidence are there for then being integrated at the policy level. We know the impact. We are generating impact. What is the other evidence that we need for showcasing that climate and nature have to go hand by hand? And I will say not only climate and nature, and this is coming back to Pilar, it's also about people. Is this in the sociable nexus? We come the 3 together. So I really do think that there is still a lot to do, but we are willing to do it. So it may sound like a conventional, but we have to work all together on this, and partnerships especially.
Thank you. We've bring in the German perspective. Minister Steffi Lemke already mentioned some implementations coming from the German side, but what you mentioned, breaking the silos, bring people together, which is discussed on every conference or on every COP, right? Leveraging more finance. So, very concrete question, how is Germany actually supporting all these calls to action? Because we hear often, same thing, same sentences, breaking the silos, let's come together, let's work together. How is Germany then working together?
Yeah, thank you for this question. And working for the government for quite a while, it's easier said than done, breaking the silos also within the government. But we have I would say we have improved our cooperation the last years. And of course, nature-based climate action at the national and international level is the approach for our ministry to follow. And Minister Lemke has already mentioned quite a number of initiatives, plans, strategies we have. Central is the federal action plan on nature-based solutions for climate and biodiversity. And there, of course, we use nature for doing climate action. And we have 10 fields of action, about 69 measures, something like that. So it's very concrete. It's working in the sectors. It's working close to nature ecosystems, from them to forestry, agriculture, infrastructure, and so on and so forth. It's really an overall issue. And of course, water plays a central role there. For example, the large-scale rewetting of peatlands is an important issue there. If you look at the figures, 53 million tons of greenhouse gases each year we have, because there are peatlands which have been drained. So rewetting them is also matters for our climate balance in Germany. The protection and the restoration of water bodies, having floodplains again, keep the water in the landscape. Minister has also mentioned that. That's important for us there. And we have a national water strategy adopted last year, which is also very important on that, with 78 measures also on all of the sectors. And of course, our approach on adaptation supports that as well. Ecosystem-based adaptation is a core approach. There we have the climate law, we have the climate adaptation law entered into force, as the minister said. We have the strategy, where we also worked with the other ministries. The other ministries, the relevant ministries for health, for infrastructure, they were asked to set up their own targets and indicators and do the monitoring afterwards. That was also a difficult process, but we have come very far, and we hope next month we will have the adoption of the strategy by our cabinet. So this is all working together. I leave it in for the sake of time.
I use your last sentence again, working together. Allow me that question here, because when we look into the current ecosystem that we are living in politically, but also, of course, the climate, from the climate perspective of the floodings and the hurricanes, is it now easier in these times of crises to advocate for the water nexus and to implement, but also to bring policymakers together, to work together, to break out these silos? Allow my irony in that question as well, but I'm very curious in your perspective, you know, how these politically not easier times allow now for a broader leverage forward in the water nexus. First Ingrid and then Veronica, and whoever wants to join us. Let's open up the round.
I mean, I often say that, you know, I mean, for a long time it was really, really hard to get the topic of water introduced in the climate conversation. But to me, it's now, in part, yes, we are all experiencing the impacts, and so we all feel it directly, and that does help as well. But in thinking about kind of the policy frameworks as well, we are now, countries are having to implement their national climate plans and policies that they're putting together, their NDCs or their NAPs or their long-term strategies in some cases. And as they're doing the implementation, they're finding that water is this connective thread. They're seeing that when they're putting together a strategy for climate resilient agriculture or food systems, if they're not talking about water in that context, like you can't achieve your goals there. And similarly on the energy side as well, like if you leave water out of the equation, you're not going to get very far. And so I think it's also that kind of practical experience of doing the implementation, of actually doing the work of working to build a more climate resilient and carbon neutral world that we're seeing where water is actually really coming out in the conversation. And so we find it's much easier to have conversations with parties now. They're like, yeah, we get it. Water's really important. What do we do about it?
Okay. Veronica, what's your experience?
Well, my experience, and we are talking about a period that we are facing with scarcities of resources, particularly finance. Well, finance is there, but it's a little bit scarce, the resources, right? So then the idea is like, I will really echo what Ulf just mentioned, if to reinforce the nexus. If we reinforce the nexus, especially when it comes to national plans, national adaptation plans, and NDCs that are being drafted, if we work under the nexus, it means that we are really making a better use of the resources, because everything will happen at the same time, which means also, you mentioned about indicators for measuring impact. When we are working on the climate-nature nexus, we are able to really capitalize on this impact and to have also for countries, I believe, like easier to facilitate your reporting period, because I think you have to report on many different conventions, biodiversity, climate, we call desertification happening soon. So by working under the nexus, you are being able to report on all different processes in a single way, and then it's like also economizing a little bit of time.
Maria, let's come in here as well. Let's bring you into our conversation. I know as a virtual guest, it's always a little bit hard to be part of the conversation in 100%, but wherever you agree or disagree, just give us a hand sign, and then of course I do see you, and you're happy and more than invited to join us. But bring into these new spaces now for the water nexus, you know, how can we bring more science into the policies that we need? How is there also, from your scientific perspective, a broader possibility to shape policies?
Sorry, I have lights and I'm suffering climate change. We have like 12 hours of shortage of energy in Ecuador, but I have a generator, so don't worry, I'm here. Anyway, so what do we have to change? I think part of the problem is us, academia. Why? Because we have to reach policymakers, and policymakers are in terms 4 to 5 years. So they are not going to see the changes, or they are not going to understand probably what changes were promoted before. So academia has a very important role in supporting the development of policies, but also the practices for these policies. And not to forget, I will mention again the community. In our experience, the views of the community sometimes are different. You can be horrified by somebody in a community like that cut a tree because this person thought that the leaf were making his area dirty. And for me, that's a crime. But why is different point of view playing a very important role? Because then Nature-based solutions needed for climate adaptation have really to be co-work with the communities and also with the policy makers. We don't need also 1,000 policy makers. We need some policies that are in place, and we need to understand what each policy maker is doing. Because of the silos, there is a problem. We look at funds for adaptation, for example. So the environmental minister in Ecuador uses the funds for adaptation. But maybe the risk management minister needs disaster risk reduction because of flooding and droughts, and it doesn't have access to the funds because they are divided. So we have to change somehow the view, and in terms of what I look at this integration. And it's very important to give support to actions that decision makers are taking. For example, I live in the largest river basin of Ecuador, the Guayas River Basin. We are divided into provinces, and there are 7 provinces. Each one have an administrative unit. Well, last week they got together and they decided that they are going to work together for restoring and doing integrated management in the basin. So now as academia, what can I do? So I can work out the needs. Okay, we need a map of the underground water. Let's have it. We need what's going to happen in the future. This is going to happen in the future. So this co-work is very important. And from academia, we have to leave the office, leave the comfort of the research unit and go and talk to the policymakers and ask what they need, and not ask only for funds for doing more research.
Gracias, Maria. Thank you. Well, let's talk then about the perspective of bringing in the community, and really let's debate about how to strengthen the local perspective, and let's zoom in into the German perspective. Ulf, how is Germany doing that in practicability and trying to raise awareness for the importance of the local level, of the local workforce that Maria just pointed out in practice? How can we imagine that?
Yeah, thank you. But let me just have 2 sentences to the science, because our policy is science-based, and we have 4 agencies working for us, scientific agencies for our ministry, and 3 times the people in these agencies and in our ministry. So yeah, we are doing that. I mean, taking it seriously, and it's a sort of credibility comes from that. No, raising awareness is very important. We work with the people. We started I don't know, 15, 20 years ago, to involve the people more, to make them understand what we are doing. For example, our federal action plan on climate action, on biodiversity. They had a broad participatory process with more than 1,000 comments and statements they received in the development of this process. Also, our adaptation strategy has seen a very broad process of participation for the development. And of course, also we raise awareness with campaigns. For example, our water strategy has quite recently launched a large public awareness campaign on water as a crucial resource. So making people understand that it is necessary to work. I mean, on adaptation, if you see the disaster news, people asked, what are you doing to prevent us from that? So we try to make them understand what we are doing. So this is really important, also in the matter of acceptance.
But coming in from the side of the responsibilities, would you rather see, if I stay with you for another second here in the German perspective, would you rather see these responsibilities in engaging the communities on a national level or on a federal level, or is it the responsibility of the civil society to be always loud enough? Or is it the responsibility of the national level to see the local level in a good manner?
It's a responsibility of all the levels. So we have to provide, of course, some support from the federal level. When we require in our law on adaptation that they should set up plans and strategies, so we have no blank spot in Germany on adaptation plans and strategies. Of course, we offer support for them, but it's also a matter of the states to do that. Also, by our constitution, they can require the communities to do that. And of course, the mayor is asked if something is happening, a disaster is happening in the community. What are you doing? So we have to include them in our thinking, in our development of our policy. So this is definitely necessary.
Thank you. Ingrid, looking from a global perspective in the designing of the frameworks, how often do you have to fight for this community level, for this local level to be integrated in the right frameworks that is benefiting nature, biodiversity, and climate action when it comes to the water nexus?
Yeah, I mean, it's always going to be a challenge, right, when you're scaling up to the global level. But the one nice thing about water is that water is really a local resource, and it's something that is managed really, really at the local level. And so it's actually quite impossible to design kind of really globally aggregated policies and things around. I mean, there's processes, there's climate risk assessment, there are types of actions that can be aggregated at that level, but really the types of solutions that we're talking about when we talk about water have to be locally appropriate. And so you have to kind of engage at that level. Now, it doesn't always happen, right? But that's the idea, and that's certainly what we would advocate for. One thing that I would say, at least in the climate space, that has evolved over time, and I think this is a positive development, is there's a lot more integration of non-state actors in the process. I mean, when the Paris Agreement was signed at COP21, there was no official platform for non-state actors to be engaged and involved in that process. And they rose up and they said, no, we need an official platform. Yeah. And they got one the following year. And water was one of the key themes under the Marrakesh Partnership. And that kind of really started a journey about 8 years ago. Now there's an entire Water for Climate Pavilion just right over there, with 75 core partner members, really diverse group of folks. There's so much programming, there's so many different levels of folks getting involved, and that actually has translated into the political discussion as well, because in the Paris Agreement, the water is not mentioned at all, not once. But now over the last 4 years, really since COP26, there's been a lot of momentum around including water in, the negotiating texts, and obviously it's formally in the Global Goal on Adaptation. The UAE Framework for Global Climate Resilience includes water. There will be water indicators under that. They're negotiating them now. So it really has expanded over the last decade. So it is changing. I think it's positive, but obviously there's still more work that we need to do.
So do we break the silos?
Have we broken them? Yeah. Absolutely not. But we are working on it. I mean, my organization, this is what we are. We have a program right now called the Water Resilience Tracker for National Climate Planning that looks at water management across those silos. And when we talk about water resilience, we have to break the silos. Mm-hmm. The reality is that the impacts that we're seeing, they're not just in the water sector, and you can't just talk about the water sector. You have to talk about energy. You have to talk about agriculture. And we have to bring, and in Germany, they're already doing this. And actually a lot of governments are starting to take this more seriously. I was just talking with a colleague from Ghana. They have have a really interesting format for how they're doing interministerial dialogues around water and making sure they're doing integrated planning. This is excellent, and these are the kind of things that we want to continue to promote. So have we gone far enough? No, but we're working on it. Yeah.
Veronica, I'd come back to you. Let's talk a little bit more about examples, that you could bring here on stage that are showing us, yes, there is successful implementation. Yes, there is successful implementation, possibility solutions on the ground in this nexus, and also when it comes to adaptation, nature restoration, and the integrated water management that we're talking here about. So give us maybe also not just the examples, but also something that we should note down on a post-it as a key factor that is so relevant for successful implementation, something that we can all take home with and to not forget.
Well, I can not this because we are in the German pavilion, but I have examples from projects that have been funded also from Germany. I think one of the greatest examples we have is a project called Scaling Up Mountain EBA, Mountain Ecosystem-Based Adaptation, is an initiative we run over, I think, almost 10 years. I have to say 8. We have a really great example in Nepal, where we were working in the Himalayas. Also, this project we work in the Andes and Mount Elgon, which is in between Kenya and Uganda. And I have to say that in Nepal, it looks like it was a very localized project. We were working mostly with women. Why with women? Because women, they were living in the mountains, and it was an out-migration from men to the urban cities. So women, they were staying in the mountains, taking care of the elders and children and so on. So we did this work there, but not only working on alternative livelihoods and so on, but we were working also on reducing landslide risk. Why? Because the forests, they were deforested. And what was happening when it was raining, the rain was producing the landslide, and the water wasn't infiltrating. So we work with them in restoring all the hills of the mountains to reduce disaster risk, working on also alternative livelihoods. And this work in restoring all the hills, we call eco-safe roads. Why eco-safe roads? Because at the same time, we were working on that and building roads that they were safe for these women to be able to communicate also in between communities. And it didn't happen that everything was left at the community level. What happened is like the Nepalese government, through all this evidence based on real action, they decided to integrate these, let's say, approaches into the national policy for the constructions of roads. So nowadays, if you see the Nepalese constitution, there is this law on transportation, it's called Law on Transportation for the Nepal government, which is based on the result of these projects. So I really do think it's something that to take away message home is like, what we are doing on the ground is really working, but we really need to put not only our brains on that, but also our hearts. We really need to believe on what we are doing. Otherwise, I have to say, personally, it's not working.
Ingrid, to design such successful projects, and of course that are then, floating into a successful national law and national determination, what are important variables? Because when we look into the freshwater ecosystems, they are disappearing, and I have the number here, 3 times faster than the forest. So there is this immense urgency also on the policymaker side, on the policy level. Also when we look into the unsustainable use and the management of water, when it comes into combination with climate change. So also from your side, we are curious to hear what are variables that we should all, from your perspective and towards policymakers, address. What are variables that are needed in designing these frameworks that are needed?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of aspects that could potentially come into that. I mean, I would say, in working on climate resilient water resource management projects, there is kind of a change in terms of the framing and the thinking that we are advocating for, and that's, the way that water projects traditionally were designed are looking at kind of maybe 30 years of hydrologic data or things like this. But those are maybe not going to be the most useful in terms of working on water projects going forward. So you have to introduce more resilience variables or conditions, so looking at building in flexibility, but also building in robustness as well. And so on the nature-based solutions side of things, that's actually where we talk a lot about the flexibility. We've talked about room for the river type projects where we're looking at floodplain restoration and things like this, or wetlands, re-wetting, et cetera, that those are areas that can provide more of that flexibility, for example, if you have more water. But then also on the flip side, because a lot of places that we're working in, it's not a floods or drought situation, it's a both-and situation, and so you need the capacity to then also potentially store those excess floodwaters in times of drought. And so building in kind of a change in thinking around the operations for management is something that we try and promote as one example. I mean, there's a lot that I could go into, but I don't want to dominate.
Absolutely. But also, of course, nature-based solutions and the water nexus is not just, a threat of one specific region. It is a global threat. And of course, when we talk about international collaboration, especially on these conferences, and I don't like the terms of global north and global south. I have a big problem with that. But just helping together, and in these times of crisis that I mentioned, where water can be a messenger of hope, but also a messenger of catastrophe when it comes to floods and droughts, how do we still need to work together, and how do we need to design these frameworks together in a more sustainable way then?
I mean, I would also say, but to your point there, actually a lot of the learning that we're doing is coming from the Global South, because they have been addressing these challenges for a long time, and they so we actually in the Global North are learning a lot from our partners in the Global South. I mean, Zambia is doing fantastic work around this. Peru with Reconstrucción con Cambios, Reconstruction with Changes. It's been going for 10 years. It's an amazing government-wide program. So there's actually a lot that we can learn. But in terms of kind of designing these policy frameworks, it's also building in that flexibility into the governance and the policy frameworks. And actually one that I like to talk about, this is not new at all. So in my region, I come from the Western United States. We're experiencing a lot of drought right now, but also flooding in regions as well. Again, both and. But there's a major river in our region called the Colorado River. It's a transboundary river, and it has a transboundary agreement that's over 100 years old at this point. So this is not a new agreement. But one thing that they built, and so when you think about kind of transboundary water agreements, you think of like a very fixed, rigid structure for how you're going to govern water for countries, and you have to have this kind of fixed nature to it. But the climate and the environment and the number of people and the priorities and the values over the last 100 years in this basin have radically changed. There's over 40 million people that live in this basin now. It's very, very different from when the compact went into place. But what they did was there is a system for making amendments and making changes. And so this is it's a great example of adaptive management and planning. So they're able to add new amendments. They call them minutes in this case, but they're able to periodically add changes to add additional governance requirements, additional flow requirements, and they're moving away from kind of maybe how it was managed 100 years ago. And so that's not a new agreement, but these are things that we can learn from when we're creating new policies and frameworks.
Yeah. Maria, I'm looking to you. I hope you can see us still. I'm looking to you when it comes to the learning from each other, another buzzwords on a lot of conferences, not just coming together, breaking into silos, but also learning from each other. But it is crucial, right? And of course, with your expertise coming from the science perspective, where do you see progress and where do you see room for improvement when it comes to learning from each other when it comes to nature-based solutions within the water nexus?
Well, I believe there are different things, and it depends where you are. If you have a limited budget, I will say that nature-based solutions are like the first option because they cost less and they can be implemented in sequences. You don't need, for example, if you are building some kind of dam or a protecting wall, the people need to see the wall. And even you are accountable if you are, let's say, the mayor or a minister, you're accountable for what is seen. But when you are looking in nature-based solutions, it takes time to have the results in place, but the community and the government and everybody is looking at how it is becoming what it was meant for. So there is a difference, and I think there is a lot of room for this. Also, depends what kind of problems you have. As mentioned, we go from the floods to droughts. So it depends which part. In my area, it's mostly floods. So the solutions we're looking for example, riverside restoration. I had the chance to fly in helicopters, and I can easily see how those agricultural areas that have trees were not flooded, while the ones that didn't have it were already flooded. So people understand this, and I think this pointing out that these solutions are feasible and are being able to manage by the local people, the ministers, it makes the difference. The problem is the timing. We want to solve the climate crisis in our time, but the climate crisis took several generations. So what we have to have in mind is that anything that we do have to think of the time frame that we are expecting to have results, how we educate the new generations so the progress is really positive, and also how we change this in the mind of the policymakers that in our side change every time. So we are used, at least in Ecuador, to live with uncertainty, and it's true, we're very resilient to this. We accommodate, but I think education is one of the most important things in having this nexus and having nature-based solutions in place.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you, Maria. Let's talk a little bit about COP29 here in Baku. How's the mood so far? Veronica, how's the mood when it comes to water? That is, of course, that is featured, but not too prominently in the current debates and negotiations. So how do you feel? It's almost, how many days do we have left? 1 day, 2 days?
Well, when it comes to the climate-nature nexus, how I feel, I think exhausted, maybe. It could be a good definition. I think 90% of people around at the venue may say the same. I think we are exhausted also because we listen and we repeat on and over again the same message. I think we are today COP29. And they still we have things that are the same topics that they were addressing Copenhagen a few years ago. So I think exhaustion can be one key word. And as a mom of 2 little ones, 1 year old, I really do hope that it is some hope for the future that we are living. So I hope next year, COP30, my key word and my key message it will be different than the one today.
What, from your perspective, is needed to bring in the water sector and the water nexus and everything that we are discussing right now really more and more, not just on the political agenda, but also into the political processes, but also into boardrooms of businesses to leverage more finance possibilities? Where do you see the room for conversation? Not just talking, but really for bringing action forward.
Well, the conversation, maybe the finance is there. We have to be clear, the finance is there, but maybe the finance has to be channeled the right way, right? There are so many different pathways where we can put the finance, but it should be channeled maybe when it's really needed. I have to say, I'm taking more personally, I'm Spanish. I see what just happened in my country last week. So maybe the finance was channeled somewhere else. So I really need to think we really need to rethink this nexus in a holistic way. We cannot treat water as a vacuum. We have to treat water as part of, in this case, for example, urban planning. How are we integrating urban planning? What is the role of local communities, as Ulf was saying, plays in there? We really need to think about when we are requesting how to mobilize finance, we should be doing, and this is my perspective, to doing in a way that we are co-developing, co-designing, and co-creating together the pathway for this finance.
If I come to you in the German perspective in a second, just allow me to turn back to Ingrid again for a global perspective and then zooming into the German perspective. You know, how far are we away from this possibility of bringing in and including water on a cross-cutting, cross-sectoral level, that we actually combine also financial mechanisms in a sustainable way and not just in silos?
I mean, I think we're getting there. I do want to pick up on something that you just said, actually. I was just on a panel before this where we were talking about the importance of planning, and that actually planning departments are really the kind of engine for adaptation, and that's actually where it should be focused, because they're naturally working across departments and agencies and things like that. And so we're seeing that happen more and more. And so I think that's a really important point. So I just wanted to highlight that as well. In terms of how far, are you saying in the political negotiations, how far are we from getting water?
Yeah, into more levels and into cross-sectoral.
I mean, it's getting there.
That's what you also said.
To use the example of the global goal on adaptation, perhaps, because this is maybe a specific entry point that we could think about. So water is included as its own kind of standalone theme. So there's 9 thematic targets and then 4 cross-cutting targets as well. But water also critically features in the ecosystems target, and we fought really hard for that to be there, and in part that is because it mirrors the way, and it's referred to as inland waters, it mirrors the CBD and the global biodiversity framework, and that was done very explicitly. And so that's a great example, I think, of how we are actually making progress to try and integrate. Now, there's several other themes in there that don't mention water, but they have major water components as well. So again, I do keep saying that we are making progress, but there's still work to do. But on GGA, I think that's a good example of one where we fought for it to be included, and it was. And so we'll probably have a target on water under ecosystems, and that's great.
And how do you feel about the COP29 now, if you reflect already a little bit when it comes to the water nexus? Satisfied, not satisfied, happy, not happy, almost crying, angry? Give us your emotions.
I mean, on the water side, we're making progress, so I feel good. Okay. On the overall negotiations, I don't feel great, but but we'll see where we land. There's still a lot of time, and the negotiators are working really, really hard, and so I always remain optimistic and positive on that. Last year, we didn't think that we were going to get to the final conclusion, and we got it done. So I would say, but on the water side, I mean, today there was just the COP presidency just launched the Baku Declaration on Water. That's the first COP presidency declaration on water ever. That's a major achievement for us. And there's a key component of it actually that we were really, really pushing for, is the continuity and the coherence, not just between UNFCCC COP years, and making sure that water is maintained going forward in the climate conversation, but also between conventions. Mm-hmm. So that there's also a connectivity between what's happening in FCCC, between CBD, between CCD, and also Ramsar. But so that to me is huge, and I give credit to the COP29 presidency for advocating for that.
Let's look ahead a little bit. Looking into what's still ahead of us when it comes not just to challenges, but also, of course, to possibilities of international engagement. Where is Germany seeing its role in fighting more and more for the water nexus, and how does Germany is pushing forward these topics that they are integrated in several spaces on political levels? give us a little bit of an insight of your ministry, in fact.
Yeah. Our minister has already mentioned some of the issues we are doing on the international level. For us, it's an important issue to advance nature-based climate action. Of course, also with a focus of water. If you look at for example, the figures, and there we could also have some improvement on the figures. If you look at the situation in Spain, for example, that they had to spend more than 10 billion to compensate the people there, and then not counting the lives, more than 200, and a reduction of their GDP by 0.2%, which is really a lot. And if you think of how some of these measures would cost, what some of these measures would have costed. So it's really an issue to count what is the cost of inaction and to make it very clear. So it's a good argument to do so. But if we are engaged in CBD, Convention on Combat Desertification, UN Decade on Restoration, Agenda 2030. Maybe one of the initiatives Minister Lemke also mentioned, what is the ENACT initiative, nature-based climate action. There we work with partners. We launched that together with Egypt at COP27. And now we are working with them, and more partner countries are coming in. This is a good thing. Our minister mentions the Adaptation Fund with the 60 million this year. The EBA fund we are proud to finance, and we have many projects of our international climate initiative. We work with the countries on adaptation, on nature-based solutions. So there's a lot we are doing, and but we are also keen on learning with our partner countries. We don't know it all on adaptation, on other measures. So we are also keen on learning, as you said. Others have good ideas. They are very innovative, and we can make use of that as well.
And with that, I would love to close that panel. Thank you so much for your insights, for joining, and we do have a little bit more time of mingling around now here live on site. But please give my panelists a round of applause. Ingrid Timboe, Dr. Maria del Pilar de Grunauer, Verónica Ruiz, and Dr. Ulf Jaeckel. Thank you so much. Muchas gracias, Maria. Bienvenidos, and yeah. Lovely to see you. Wonderful. Mingle around. We do have a little bit of time. Yes, lovely to have you here at the German Climate Pavilion. Thank you so much for making space in your calendars, but also to you, ladies and gentlemen, in the live stream. All the best to you, and we see each other tomorrow, the latest. Or you stick around a little bit more in the live stream, as we do have more in the program. Thanks for joining. Thank you.
Welcome to the German Climate Pavilion at COP29 in Baku. Germany. Climate solutions, fast and fair.